Well, hello, everyone. I'm Zack Kucharski. I'm the executive editor at the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. I'd like to welcome you to today's session of Iowa Ideas in Depth Week, where we're looking at the community development thread. It's our final day of our in-depth week in community development. Our session today is about strategy across geographic boundaries. And so we're going to talk about some innovation, what it takes to get collaboration going, and other themes. And so joining me today are Karen Kurt and Devin Deaton, and I will turn it over to each of them to introduce themselves in a second. But I wanted to also, before I do that, say that this is an interactive conversation where you should feel free to please throw questions in the Q&A forum, and we will work those into the conversation. I have some questions to get us going, but certainly we'll work your questions in as we go. And so without further ado, I think what we'll do is go with introductions. And so Karen, you're with the ECOG, but you kind of want to talk a little bit about your approach and what you do.
Sure. I'm the executive director of the East Central Iowa Council of Governments, affectionately known as ECOG. And I'm going to apologize. I have a cold. I do have a lozenge. I may cough, so my apologies up front for that. But ECOG is an intergovernmental agency. We are sort of the creation of 6 counties here in Iowa. Those counties are Washington, Johnson, Benton, Iowa, Lynn, and Jones. And we're one of several councils of government that exist throughout the state of Iowa and throughout the U.S. And when I describe our mission, I think of it in 4 different ways. One is planning for the future. We are an organization of planners. If you look at our staff, that's primarily their background. Also, regional collaboration, which really kind of fits in with the theme today. So within our region, how are we able to work more effectively together? Then also we provide technical assistance to the communities within our region and primarily our rural communities who may, in some instances, lack the staff they need for certain types of programs, and we can step in and provide that assistance. And then lastly, leveraging state and federal resources. And that's a big role that we play, is to try and help our communities access federal and state grants. And a fifth thing, I guess, that or a place where we has really become highlighted in terms of the role that we play is in disaster recovery. Our organization, we really aren't on the front lines in terms of initial disaster response, but when we get further into the recovery phase, and it's about, again, getting resources to the region from higher levels of government, we play an important role in that work.
All right. Well, thank you, Karen. Devin, with the Aspen Institute, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, how's everybody doing today? I hope you're having a good one. I'm Devin Deaton. I am the Action Learning Manager with the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group. The Community Strategies Group is one of many different programs that operate within the Aspen Institute, and our primary focus is on rural and regional community and economic development. We've been around since 1985, and since then our focus has been on rural America, and we're really committed to increasing equity and opportunity through advancing asset-based and systems building approaches towards economic, social, and health outcomes. And what we've really found is that can't be done through economic development or community development alone. It's really a unification and really trying to understand and work with communities as a whole to improve multiple different types of capital, whether that's financial capital and access to resources, but also human capital and the people and the health and the vibrancy of communities. And so, I'm bringing a more national perspective to the conversation today, and hope I'm able to share some insights that we've learned over the years working with rural communities, not just in Iowa, but all across the country.
Thank you, Devin, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to share into the chat. We're going to base today's conversation There's lots of policy documents that folks could draw on, but in preparation for today, I kind of wanted to share some of the links that I was looking at, both of the Aspen Institute's work as well as the ECOG work. And so those links are in the chat, and they'll be helpful as background documents in today's conversation, but also I would say are important for folks to kind of check out. And hopefully after the conversation today, you'll be even more excited to do so. But to start with a couple questions here, Devin, just ahead of the pandemic, the Aspen Institute put out a report on rural development hubs, and it talked about the innovation, the rural innovation infrastructure. And can you talk a little bit about what rural hubs are and why they're important?
Sure, happy to. So rural development hubs, this report was really the culmination of a number of decades long work with rural and regional intermediary organizations. Multi-county organizations like Karen's Council of Government, community foundations that operate across multi-county or even statewide. And if you go to the report, you can see a detailed list of the types of organizations that we interviewed and have worked with over the years that culminated in this report. But the real key to rural development hubs is, these are the major players within rural communities who are advocating and advancing asset-based economic and community development models. And this is increasing the assets that a community are able to rely upon in order to support the decision making that they have themselves decided that they want to pursue, whether that's we need more parks in our community because our children need more places to play. Well, how are we going to finance that? How are we going to work on this? Like, this is increasing the assets that our community has access to. It also, these rural development hubs are focused on increasing local ownership, right? That, and I hope we get back to it a little bit later, talking about some other strategies around economic development and why we really feel that an asset-based, an asset-based approach is the best model, because it really does create an increased local ownership. This is small businesses within a community. The dollars that are spent within a community circulate multiple times within the community, increasing prosperity. And also the third factor, the third criteria that we really think about when we think about rural development hubs is that they're focused on helping to lift up and support low-income people in places, the parts of our communities and our regions that have not seen, have been historically disinvested by big business or federal government or whatever kind of layers it may be, right? Supporting low-income people in places, and in a lot of parts of the country, this is supporting Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color.
Well, excellent. And Devin, we will circle back to those to get into greater depth on each of those. And also, I think the ingredients that it takes to make those connections and that conversation happen. Karen, I'm going to share a link. I've been told that there's an issue with my attempt to shorten the link that I was going to share, but this is to the ECOG piece in the chat. And hopefully this one works for folks that were getting an access denied note. But Karen, I was going to talk, you've just been going through the Envision Eastern Iowa process for some time. And I'm hoping you can kind of talk a little bit about that process, why we as a region, why we do some of that planning, but also this approach was different this time, and I'm curious kind of why you wanted a different approach.
Sure. So Envision East Central Iowa was our regional planning process, and we brought together really stakeholders throughout the region, whether it was our counties and cities, it was our economic development partners, such as the Metro Economic Alliance here in Cedar Rapids, or ICAD in Iowa City, or our rural partners. We had our major community foundations, our United Way major organizations, as well as Kirkwood, our community college, and University of Iowa. And so really sort of bringing these people together and as a steering committee for the process to develop this roadmap of how we can increase prosperity region-wide. And I think to Devin's point, I think there was a time when, when we looked at metrics such as maybe jobs or population growth or gross output as being the most important metrics that mattered. But I think that that's really changed, and that's really reflected in our plan as well. And there's a lot in there that goes more to quality of life and ensuring that we have prosperity for all of our residents. But in terms of the process, because it's a regional plan, we're trying to bring together stakeholders from as many organizations as we can. And we started with a broad survey, just asking about the importance of like 20 different factors that we knew were out there and that there was a lot of conversation about. And then that led into a think tank event where we had over 100 people participate. And I think that was the part that maybe was different about this process compared to previous processes, in that we were using what's called scenario-based planning. And we were fortunate to be able to partner with external firm that has a lot of experience doing this. It had worked in Iowa, but they work worldwide. They're called Future IQ. And so really in the scenario-based planning, you kind of develop these two continuums, and based on those two continuums, which we developed based on the survey feedback we'd gotten, you developed four plausible future scenarios. And so that was a different approach, and we wanted to do that in part because we thought it would be very powerful, but also because I think the last planning effort here, people perceived as not being that successful. And so we wanted to create a little bit of, something new, something fresh, something different. And it was very interesting in the sense that I think what we found was that there was quite an appetite for change. And when people looked at the scenario that they thought if we did nothing, where we would end up, when they compared that with the scenario where they would like us to go to, there was a pretty big difference. And the other thing that I think came up repeatedly throughout this process, even as we moved past the think tank into sort of actually developing potential strategies and actions, was that there was a lot of interest in moving on a lot of fronts. We tried to prioritize in different ways at different stages throughout the process, and we've just repeatedly kept getting this feedback of we need to move in a lot of different areas simultaneously.
Well, Devin, you mentioned it at the onset, kind of bringing a national perspective. I'm curious, when you look at some of the hubs, if there are, ingredients or, those that are successful in their processes, what does it take to kind of get a successful process put together? When you were looking at these hubs, what were they able to do that maybe, an individual agency it was less successful at?
Yeah, so to be clear, I think some of these rural development hubs are individual agencies, but like Karen articulated, they are doing the work of weaving together other organizations and agencies within the footprint of whatever effort is underway, coordinating and supporting the effort as needed, kind of holding the whole, right? That you have people working on workforce over here, people working on healthcare over here, or education, and somebody needs to stand in the middle of these folks and say, well, we've got common alliance, let's work together, and this is how we can move those multiple metrics forward. Education, workforce, hey, it's a natural fit. A couple of other things to really recognize about the role of a rural development hub is that they're intermediaries, and so we've described one layer of the intermediaries, that they're like in between all these other organizations helping to coordinate at the regional level. They're also organized kind of horizontally, or sorry, vertically, facilitating connections between national organizations, whether that's national philanthropy, potentially state level efforts, and the federal government, which is like the biggest set of resources that are available to any community, and helping communities on the ground articulate a need and be able to source resources from the national level down to the local level. And in order to do that, it sounds like, oh yeah, okay, we can have an intermediary. You know, it's very challenging because of a couple of different factors, right? And I think trust is a major component here. That somebody parachuting into a community and saying, this is the way we should do our planning effort, and they say, we? who is this we that you're talking about? I think the strength of the Rural Development Hub is they're homegrown, right? That they've got local knowledge, experience, and roots within the communities that they are working with. Whether that's the employees who are at the at this organization, live in the places that they're trying, that they're working to support. And the trusted relationships have grown over time, right? This isn't something that you can set something up new. Don't be afraid to be brave and try a new collaboration. That said, you're going to have to be aware of the need to build trust, as well as having a decent sense of what relationships already exist within community and within the region in order to be successful.
Yeah, I'm curious if there are ways or tips on that building trust, because obviously, if you're trying to move on several fronts, there's sometimes challenges with, well, how do we pick which one? Or sometimes an individual person or an agency maybe has a higher level of trust than others. How do you maintain the trust when it's tested? Are there tips or organizations that you see that do that better than others? And is there a secret there?
I'm definitely interested to hear what Karen has to say about that. I'm working more hand in hand with organizations at the local level. She's on the front lines of these types of relationships. So I don't want to put the kind of big picture national perspectives in front of, I think, what kind of the lessons that can really come from the ground. So I'm happy to weigh in after Karen, if
Karen, yes.
I think that's spot on. I think trust can be a challenge, and this is reflecting. I've been in this role for 2.5 years, so I'm also reflecting on my previous life working in local government, and I do think there has to be a high level of transparency and a high level of communication, and a willingness to own up when things don't go right. I think that there also has to be a mindset of that we're not in competition with each other. And I think that can be a real struggle. It's something I've observed here within our region, that sometimes, people get into a zero-sum game mindset, and we really have to think about what's best for the greater good. And sometimes to do that, you've got to be willing to sacrifice a little bit individually to advance the group as a whole. And that can be challenging depending on whatever the local dynamics are. But I think success breeds success and breeds trust. So to the extent you're able to find those successes and really elevate that work and keep building on that, I think that can go a long way.
Yeah, there's that saying that decisions move at the speed of trust. and if that's slow, then maybe it's good, right? Hasty decisions don't necessarily lead to quality outcomes, right? If it takes 6 months to build the trust and understanding and transparency in relationships in order to be even ready to start making decisions about the process, that 6 months is well spent. I think that there is a need to move, to keep moving though. And Karen, I think what you suggested a moment ago was really wonderful, where you're building momentum with every decision. You are able to make every convening of local stakeholders. You're able to demonstrate, we might not have built that community center that we really want to build, right? But we've started talking about what it might look like, what it might take to get this done. And that type of relationship building is going to be great for getting the community center done. And it's going to be great for the next project down the road. And when a crisis hits, when there's a natural disaster or something that needs to be responded to, those relationships will already be in place. Not to say that you shouldn't be planning now for emergency disaster preparedness, but that those relationships will stand you in good stead.
It seems, in both reports, there was a lot of talk of kind of a longer term gain. And Devin, to your point about momentum, it seems like that needs to be measured along the way, and maybe communicated to the group so that it's keeping its momentum, or it's checking how, maybe those lofty goals were set, but, incremental progress. How helpful was that in terms of, Karen, you mentioned maybe the planning process the last time around, they wanted it done a little bit differently. Was that a piece of that this time? And how helpful is that, in terms of keeping things on track and measuring along the way?
Well, I do think that that's an important point, and I think that's still something we're having conversations about. Is the planning part is really the easy part. It's the implementation that's challenging, and so how do we make sure, given that regionally there isn't in our region, there are a few of us, like our organization Kirkwood, that maybe operate at more of a regional basis, but for the most part we don't have regional entities. So it means that we've got to have people that are willing to step forward and do this work on top of their normal regular work. And so how do we build coalitions of what one of my committee members described as the able and willing, that are willing to step forward and take on pieces of this? And then how do we keep that momentum going? And what are appropriate measures for our success? And, I think that's something we're still having conversations about, how to best structure that. And I'm sure it's going to be a learning path as we go.
Yeah, Karen, that really speaks to some other interesting issues. Looking at a region, it doesn't necessarily have a regional development hub, right? That rural America and rural states have an incredible amount of assets, but population and organizational capacity is not necessarily one of them. And so, it is wonderful when you find an organization within a geographic footprint that is thinking transformationally about what could be. It's not just let's do our job, let's get this grant and let's administer it. It's what do we need in order for our community to be ready for the next generation? And it's that type of big picture transformational thinking that that sets rural development hubs apart from other organizations that are doing good and necessary work. Maybe they just need a nudge from their neighbor, their rural development neighbor, to say, hey, let's think about let's do some of that big picture and thinking about what could be. So I think, and hopefully as our conversation moves forward, we can talk a little bit more about like, what can we do as an entire country or as the state of Iowa to foster more of these transformational organizations within rural communities. And so I'll leave that door open for later thinking.
Well, Devin, I think in the Rural Development Hub report, we had our Iowa USDA Rural Development Director in earlier in the week, and this is one of those spaces that maybe from a policymaking standpoint there's room. But I'm curious. We'll start to hear the Farm Bill reauthorization discussion happen, but with as we think about the USDA and the rural development arm, are there other things that we should be thinking about to make more of these happen? Or what is the discussion that has to happen locally before you can have the bigger picture? Is it the chicken and the egg? Which comes first? Is local versus the national, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to happen simultaneously. And, right now we have a pretty amazing policy window to be able to make change. So I think the federal government agencies, USDA in particular, all the agencies I've had the opportunity to work with are really have their ears open right now. There's a lot of federal comment periods on particular types of not on legislation, but how do we implement a program? What should we be taking into account when we're asking for grant applications? How can we reach some more of those marginalized populations that I mentioned previously? And so being able to know about those comment periods, that's always a challenge. My group, the Community Strategies Group, we do have a federal resources page. I'll put the link into the chat. We try to keep pretty good track of rural development opportunities for local communities to be able to add their voice. And the inclusion of rural voices at the national level is paramount, right? I mean, I think it's what's been missing for 10 years, and so even if we can increase it by a factor, that would be wonderful. From the other side, the kind of the federal side and federal thinking, there was a proposed rural partnership program. This was part of the Build Back Better Act that did not pass Congress in January. And this would have created a multi-billion-dollar program to fund rural organizational capacity building. So this isn't just like a grant to build a facility or to do wastewater work, to rebuild a water plant. This is dollars that are going to go to an intermediary organization, like I've articulated today, that would let them hire staff, right? That would allow them to convene organizations like Karen has mentioned today. And so there's a couple of other federal programs that have done something similar. They're very small dollar programs. This could be a potential way that we could jumpstart regional economic development within rural places. So there's some talk about that being included in the Farm Bill. The Build Back Better is pretty much defunct. And so you can let your rural development folks, contacts know. You can let your Congress person know that that you want to see more investment in rural places, and here's a tool. You can find a link to learn more about the Rural Partnership Program, the proposed program, on the website that I'll share in just a second, and I'll stop talking.
Oh, I appreciate that. Karen, I wanted to talk a little bit about engagement. And I'm curious, we're in a period where what's the new normal, I think, is still probably being written. And you went through a regional planning process in the midst of a pandemic. And I've had several conversations with area leaders about there isn't a lot of community engagement going on. The budgets are being passed without even a public comment being made. And I'm curious, what did you see going through that experience? How did you work to get engagement?
Sure. I do think engagement has been a challenge, and I think it's I think it could just be weariness, honestly, and it being in a region where we had two disasters that we've managed. I think people are stretched pretty thin. For us as an organization, this regional plan was, wasn't necessarily as much direct citizen input as organizational input. But we did, offer online opportunities through an online engagement site where we had discussion boards, and so we tried to put that out there as another method for people to participate. We had somewhat mixed response to that. Our think tank was originally supposed to be an in-person event that was going to be in the end of September, and we had to pivot to a virtual event, and we're still having conversations about, wow, that had an impact, because we know that had we been in person, there would have been these conversations that would have taken place that just would have added that much more potentially to the plan itself. So I think it's definitely a challenge to, generally though, I think when you're looking for engagement, you're best off to try and go to where people are, rather than asking them to come to you, and to try and provide as many avenues as you can potentially for people to provide that input. And then again, communication. So you're telling them the purpose, and then you're also trying to help close the loop at the end with respect to what was the end result of this feedback that you gave us. But I think engagement, pandemic or no pandemic, engagement has been something that I think, at least in the government sphere, that people it's been challenging, just because we know that there are new groups. There's more awareness, let's put it this way. There's more awareness that there are voices that have been missing from the conversation. But yet at the same time, it's hard to, it's been challenging to figure out how to get those voices engaged, given all the other challenges that I've mentioned, just people having work and childcare and other demands in their life. So,
Devin, I'm curious from the national perspective. You mentioned bringing voices that have been missing from the conversation, and also trust. And I'm curious at that kind of that micro discussion, is that a challenge too, of building trust? If the system hasn't worked, are you going to be open about that, or are you going to be scared about and so I'm curious what you're seeing, and maybe what's encouraging.
Yes, that is a big challenge in many parts of the country. Historic discrimination, systemic discrimination from the state government on down, from the federal government on down through to communities, and so incorporating the voice of residents within a planning process is crucial. And I know that Zoom is not ideal, but at the same time, it does provide some potential flexibility. We recently are about to publish a series of briefs on the immigrant communities and how social service organizations can better connect and work with different immigrant populations. And COVID was terrible for Black and Brown communities. They've seen way higher mortality rates, but at the same time, Zoom has allowed, outreach through Zoom has allowed organizations to meet families where they are. And so instead of being like, do I attend this public meeting, which is very important to me, or do I take my kids to, do I cook dinner for my kids? Let's say those are the two options. Now they can do both, right? They can be on Zoom. They don't have to be on screen. They don't have to even say anything, but they're there listening and participating in the event. And so I think we have to be just even more intentional about creating space. And so in terms of reaching out to an immigrant population, are your meeting events translated into Spanish and into other languages that are relevant to the community? And I know that's another cost, but it's like the cost of doing business well, to be able to connect. And so do you have trusted messengers within those target communities that you can work with to be able to get the message out? Are you planning a meeting within a space? Let's say you can do a physical meeting now. We're kind of coming out of things, and are you planning in a meeting in a place that's safe for people who might view the government with some trepidation? Churches or community centers or schools, maybe a more potentially perceived as a safer space than a government facility or some other place. So I think that it goes back to that, taking time and building partnerships with those target populations that you want to reach.
Excellent. I have an audience question that's been posed, and Karen, I think this one is going to come your way, and it's asking, to what extent are Iowa's 3 state universities and their faculties involved in the efforts that we're seeing in community development? What could they do that would be more helpful?
Well, we certainly had the University of Iowa involved in terms of the strategic committee in terms of Envision East Central Iowa. And now that we're getting more to the implementation phase where there are specific action steps that teams will be working on, I think that's an excellent opportunity potentially for faculty or students to be involved in advancing some of those initiatives. And I think the same question was asked yesterday, and Jeff Pomerantz was talking about a partnership the city of Cedar Rapids had with Iowa State to look at how they might use waste products from food processing or other agricultural processing and develop new products. And I think that's a great example of an action that's already being done that really fits well with our plan, which was talking about how to be more innovative in terms of some of our core industries here in the region. So I think there are, just in community development in general, there are certain programs like IDM, the Institute for Decision Making at UNI, or the CIRIS program at Iowa State, that do get tapped fairly frequently to play a role and or participate in various community development initiatives. But there's always room for growth, I think. And as somebody new to the region, I'm still trying to develop some of those relationships that will enable me to be more effective in trying to figure that out.
I'll ask a potential loaded question, but I'm curious if there's certain levels that need to be involved in some of these discussions to make them more effective. Your city managers or your higher level folks, or is this something that works from the ground up? And or if you're using a ground up process, how do you avoid some of that maybe late inning sabotage that might occur when everybody's been working to collaborate and the decision maker goes the opposite direction?
I guess that doesn't worry me as much as because I think whether or not the absolute top person was involved or it was a delegate of that top individual, when you look at the content and the types of strategic actions we're talking about, it's hard for me to imagine that the leaders would want to go a completely different direction. I mean, there was just a really strong consensus. And that was another thing that I think was really interesting, is that for all the talk you hear about the differences within our region between maybe Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, or between the urban areas and the rural areas, there was really a shocking degree of alignment in terms of people might use different language, but in terms of the direction that they thought the region should go. So for me, to me, it's going to be more a question of resources, as Devin was alluding to. It takes human resources to be able to kind of pull together these multi-party initiatives to build this trust and to start this momentum rolling. And so there's going to come a point where we're, if we really want to make progress, we're going to have to probably ask for resources. And then at that point, will it be enough of a priority for different organizations to want to put some skin on the game? It's a unique time because in some ways we have maybe unprecedented resources in terms of grant opportunities, but it takes humans to make all that happen, and to build those networks and those collaborations, and I think that's going to be our greater challenge, actually.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Kind of tying in with the question about universities. I don't have any particular expertise with your universities in Iowa, but generally, I think that there's a huge need within rural communities and within rural organizations to have access to better data about whether that's demographic data or kind of econometrics, and the university system, as land-grant universities, are in a really good position to be able to serve that need. What I've heard from rural communities is that unfortunately it's oftentimes they have to pay for access to data about themselves, and so there's a little bit of an irony there, or in a kind of an unfortunate situation. I think if if there was a way to be able to build some partnerships between the university system and local organizations in terms of data sharing or help crunching the numbers, data literacy trainings, this could be really transformational. So because once people start understanding what the situation is within their community, and you have this kind of idea from the perspective where you live, but when you're able to start doing some of that data mapping, you get an even deeper understanding of where you need to go. I think and I'll leave it there.
Karen, you mentioned kind of the unique position that we're in with the grants and the recovery dollars that are flowing into areas. How comfortable are you that I'm curious, are we in a spot where maybe the cash came too quickly, and it'll be old model thinking, or spreading it around to do something that could be a generational opportunity that moves a region ahead? is there a way to gauge how comfortable that it'll just spend it in lots of little pockets, or regionally applied?
I think that's a great insight. I was off. I have reflected like, gosh, I wish I'd had this plan done when we got our first initial CARES allotment for our agency, but because I would have plotted out how to spend it differently. Timing is always a thing, right? Whether it's now or some other time. So I'm just going to go back to any forward momentum is positive, and I don't think a whole lot about what ifs or if we'd only had this, or the question is, what can we do now, and how do we take advantage of given what we know now, how do we best take advantage of what might be available to us? I will say, going back to the previous question, maybe about federal programs, one of the things that was nice about the ARPA program, I think, was that both the state and for the local governments, that they had a lot of discretion in how they spend those dollars. And even between the initial proposed rule and the final Treasury rule, I mean, just a lot of discretion. And I think that's really exciting for communities to be able to have that level of latitude. And I think that when we look at how we're getting resources to local areas, I mean, I think for the federal programs, it's hard to get those sometimes out to the rural areas because the scale is too big, or the ask is too big in terms of, they want to see X amount of job creation, and that just isn't what's going to happen. And so I wish that there were more micro programs or programs that just had a lot of flexibility in them, because I do think that given those resources, communities can do very exciting things. And even if it feels like right now, like if we talk to most of our rural communities and we ask them how they're going to spend their dollars, they're probably going to tell us that they're putting it towards a water sewer project. But you know what? That's desperately needed. And even if it doesn't seem that glamorous, it's probably going to free up resources somewhere down the road for something that might be more exciting or seem more exciting.
Devin, I'm curious, from your perspective, with the some of the dollars that have been flowing in, and sometimes, there are probably periods of times where the definitions of what is rural get in the way of cash getting into some of the communities that need it. Is this an era where maybe there's been some lessons learned? Or too soon to tell?
Well, I think the different, and your audience may be familiar with the different definitions for rural. The U.S. Census has one definition, OMB has another definition, and so yeah, it can create some confusion potentially as to like what really counts as a rural community. Last year in January, there was a proposal to change the definition of rural to increase the population amount for one of the definitions, and we were actually able to organize through the public NOFA, the notice that this was going to happen. We were able to say, wait a minute, you all need to do some more thinking about how this is actually going to affect people's lives. People have been basing a lot of decisions on these definitions. That said, I think it's the conversation about what is rural America, defining it is a little bit of a distraction from the fact that, these are human communities and the people within them and need supports in certain ways, need to be able to access resources, and need to be supported from the federal government through the state and into the local systems. And so I think that some of the issues remain the same, regardless of how you are defining it. I mean, once you get into applying for a particular grant from a federal agency, then it certainly will. That said, the grants clearly articulate what definition they're working with. So I don't know if that's helpful.
You had mentioned early on in the conversation about the asset-based models, and I'm curious, to the extent that, why do you believe, and from the research that you've been doing, why, do you see that they're performing better? And then, are there some quick, strategies that should be in place to grow more of these? What does it take to kind of, for areas across Iowa or beyond that maybe haven't thought of this? What does it take to put a foundation in place?
Sure. I think that the difference between asset-based economic development models and what you might call like a traditional model of business attraction is two really different ways to think about like how our community can move forward. The attraction model is really like, hey, how can we get Intel to build a huge plant in our area? How can we get Ford to John Deere to build a new factory in our community? And it's oftentimes a terrible race to the bottom with tax incentives that erode the financial benefits that come from a business locating within a new facility within a particular community. And it gets to the counterpoint to what Karen was mentioning a moment ago, is that it fosters competition across communities that desperately need to collaborate. And so instead, and then what happens 10 years down the road? Does John Deere stay in the community? Does the Ford plant, move back to Tennessee or some other part of the country? And where does that leave the community? It's a boom and bust cycle. And the asset-based economic approach says, let's not prepare for the big win. Let's grow a sustainable economic base through small business, through entrepreneurship, and through leaning on the assets that are always going to be here. The people within our community, our natural resources, our intellectual capital, the things we know how to do the best, and build on those instead of saying, we're going to be saved by some big business, moving in. It's hard. It's a lot. It's not easy work because it's all those things that we've talked about already today. It's building stakeholder understanding for what the future could look like, and moving towards that. It takes coordination, and there's no silver bullet like being able to do a ribbon cutting on the new factory. So it doesn't mean that you don't attract new businesses, and in fact, having a high quality of life and abundant natural amenities. These are the things that businesses are looking around the country for, and they say, oh wow, that part of Iowa is thriving because their people and their communities are strong. That's the type of place that we want to locate in.
It seems like it's a longer play or a longer view, so that you're not going on an individual project, but if you have all of the landscape correct, you'll have more wins over time. Hopefully. Is that fair?
I think so. I mean, I think it aims to be sustainable rather than what I described as kind of a boom and bust. Yep. The dollars stay in the community because the people who own the businesses, the entrepreneurs, they live within the community, as opposed to say, hey, let's have a new Amazon warehouse, which, no slight to Amazon, but the dollars that are spent on Amazon don't stay within the community. They go to Seattle. So it's like, wouldn't we rather be able to invest our dollars locally?
I'm curious, just as we're kind of in our final moments, having gone through the pandemic, just in general, I'm curious how much of that do you feel more optimistic as things start to improve, that some of the theories have there been unseen challenges that maybe have been brought to light that, hey, some of these models we need to think about or to course correct a little bit, or have they proven out some of the, yes, we've been thinking this for a long time? Devin, I'm kind of curious. I know Karen's going through a cough right now, so
Okay.
I'll throw that
Sure.
one to you.
Happy to weigh in. I mean, the pandemic has been terrible on so many fronts, and it's really hard to say that there's a silver lining. Remote work is potentially one of those silver linings. Companies saying, well, we're not, you can live anywhere, and it gives an opportunity to young professionals who may have grown up in a rural place to be able to move comfortably back to the community that they love with a higher salary, and then those dollars, coming from Seattle to
Yep.
rural places. I like the sound of something like that. I mean, that's dependent on a lot of factors, including broadband access. And I know that you all have been talking about that as well this week. So,
yep.
It goes back to the thing that Karen articulated. It's multiple factors that have to move at the same time. And, you kind of push one forward and then you push another one, or you got two hands and you can push two forward at the same time. We've over the last 2 years, not related to the pandemic, but just coincidental that's what we've been working on. The Community Strategies Group has been in a multi-level stakeholder engagement process, articulating a new framework for understanding rural prosperity and how we can, what are the factors and building blocks that are necessary to be in place in order to foster economic and community prosperity. So I'll put a link to that. We just released that this week, and we're doing a lot of related programming and publications connected to this resource. And so I'd if you find it interesting, if you take a look at it and you say, "Oh, this is kind of neat," let me know. Shoot me an email. I'll put my email address into the chat as well.
Well, you'll have one fan, and that'll be me. So I'll certainly be looking at that. So I appreciate that. I think we're kind of in a good spot, Karen. I don't know if you want to add anything in terms of silver linings or things that maybe have been proven out through the pandemic that leave you in an optimistic state.
I mean, I think there are a couple things, and one is we've learned more what we can do with not needing to be physically present, which is really what Devin was alluding to. You can work remotely, you can run a business, and potentially access a much broader market than just your local market from rural Iowa. And so I think that does hold promise. I think the other thing that maybe I saw come out of the pandemic a little bit is just that community reliance, or people turning to each other for help and support, especially during the early days of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And a recognition, as supply chains were disrupted, of the importance of those local businesses, and having access to those local businesses. So I think that those are potential silver linings coming out of it.
Excellent. Well, I think I appreciate both of you for taking the time with us today, and to our audience as well. I want to be respectful. We're coming up to the 2-minute warning, and so I will leave the conversation for today there for now. There are certainly links and plenty of reading to be done for folks that want to continue to do that. This brings to a close our first in-depth week of the year. We have 2 more in-depth weeks ahead of the Iowa Ideas Conference. Our May in-depth week will focus around human and social services, and in July we'll be working on healthcare. The Iowa Ideas Conference is registration's open. It's October 13th and 14th. It'll again be virtual, free to attend with registration. Our opening keynote as we debut our arts and culture track as part of the event, will be internationally acclaimed opera performer and Iowa native Simon Estes. And so you can register now, iowaideas.com, and we'll be continuing to update the programming as we build those sessions and work towards the event in October. So to Karen and to Devin, thank you for your time today in our conversation. And thanks to everyone who has joined us throughout the week for the conversations on community development. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.